Hello everybody and welcome to This Week in Security. I'm your host Luca, and this week we're going to be talking about a new report that outlines that maybe AI copilot code isn't so great for the long-term sustainability of coding. A new research report by GitClear, a company that helps with keeping track of the amount of lines of code created and all of those metrics related to programming for companies, outlined in their report that code assistants, diligently accepted a far greater share of code writing responsibility during 2024, but in that process, a lot of the quality of the code has decreased drastically. Their current claim is that AI is prioritizing the short-term benefits of, looking more efficient and improving your code base, instead of prioritizing for long-term sustainability and lower code debt. But first we have to outline a couple of things. What do we mean by, code of low quality, and what do we mean by sacrificing long-term code debt for, short-term benefit? So first we have to understand a couple basic principles of how we organize code and what we like and what we don't like in general for, coding as a whole. So first of all, most companies and most programmers will agree that copy-pasting code and having repeat code all throughout your program and your large database of code is generally a bad idea. This is because if, for example, a security breach was identified with a specific piece of code, if that code is actually copy-pasted in a bunch of different places, you have to manually edit all of those places instead of, that piece of code being referenced by all of those different places and separately, just editing that one instance of code affecting everything. And whenever you have multiple portions of the code that use the same sort of chunk of code, and you take it and you separate it and you just make it individualized, that is called refactoring. What GitClear found in its report and in its research is that the percentage of changed lines moved for refactoring has actually dropped so significantly, it has dropped below the amount of lines that have been copy and pasted. This was done by analyzing the different code bases and repositories all across GitHub, and the percentage of changed lines moved for refactoring dropped from 25% in 2021 to a little below 10% this year, or 2024 actually. Meanwhile, the amount of copy-pasted lines went from around 8% in 2021 to 12%. Which means for the first time in GitHub history, as long as we have been documenting this type of stuff, the amount of copy-pasted code and duplicate code has actually gone above the amount of changes and lines moved for refactoring. Another important finding that they found in their report is that the idea of code churn becoming more and more prevalent. Code churn is basically a metric that measures how much code is changing over time, and the really bad code churn is that code that, changes very frequently and very quickly from its time when it was last changed. What they found is that on average in 2021, there was 3.27% of code churn, but in 2025, and the prediction is that there will be 6.87% of code churn, meaning that more code is being created, but also more code is retroactively gone back and edited every single time. This is how that bad on paper because, you always want to go back and change and edit the code if you found any, issues with it. But the problem is that the code churn that we're seeing increase is that which edits lines that were edited at least, at most 2 weeks ago, which means that, you personally created a code, someone else went in the next 2 weeks, edits it, and then someone else in the next 2 weeks after that comes back and edits it again. So there's a lot of lost efficiency and a lot of lost productivity in the process of the code churn increase. I don't know why, but there's a lot of complicated words on this episode, and I'm really struggling to say all of these words properly. So all of that we said about code churn, it kept in mind, means that added to the fact that duplicate blocks of code went from 0.48% in your entire code base to 6.66%, means that whenever a piece of code is created, it most likely is a piece of code that already existed in the code and that could have been refactored and moved and made simpler in order to decrease the amount of, unnecessary inefficiencies. But also in the process, those lines of code will most likely be edited in the next 2 weeks. So there is a lot of lost efficiency and a lot of points of entry for potential cyber attacks whenever these duplicate codes and an unnecessary churn happens. The craziest part is that most programmers' perceptions on the productivity changes due to AI actually is good. Most programmers either extremely, moderately, or slightly believe that their productivity has increased due to AI helping them program. There's very few that actually think that it decreases the productivity of the developers, which means that AI adoption in programming will only increase over time. Funnily enough, Google Dora's 2024 report proves that developers somewhat trust AI, not 100%, but AI-generated code is only somewhat trusted, which kind of plays against the idea that it's increasing productivity. Because if we only somewhat trust AI to increase our productivity, why are we trusting it to do all of this work for us? And that really encourages a more broader discussion that I hope you guys will have in the comments as well, and I'll chime in there here and there, but about the responsibility that we have not only as programmers, but just as consumers and users of AI in how we use AI. How much of, the code that we're generating with AI do we really trust? And do we think that in its current state, I'm not talking about in the future because the future could look drastically different, but in its current state, how much can we trust AI to do this work for us? And how much do we, want to prevent our programmers in our teams, ourselves, from using it in the future? Is this a sort of, if I don't use it, do I fall behind question and problem? Or are we, sacrificing long-term sustainable code for short-term, potential improvement in productivity? And this does affect the long term of, all code bases and companies, because technical debt, which is something I mentioned earlier, describes what results when, development teams take actions to expedite the delivery of a piece of code or a project that later needs to be refactored, which means that, by using this AI generated code that automatically, tries to duplicate by autofilling the code that you're trying to look for, you are sort of making code bases in general more inefficient. You are putting more work for the future programmers or for yourself in the future to have to refactor all of this code in order for it to be more efficient. We are sort of, I guess, spiraling into becoming inefficient because of our reliance in AI coding alongside us. Maybe the right answer for that is maybe we should hold off on programming with, alongside AI and using Copilot only whenever we know we're doing small tests for them to, for us to then actually, you grab that prototype or test and then make actual good code out of. But, it's a very complicated question because AI also learns from, coding alongside us. So who's to say? Today's news is less about, the hardcore impact that it will have right now, or the economy, or DeepSeek breaking expectations or anything like that. And it's more so about we should sort of slow down and understand how much this could impact the future of programming and the future of our market and our economy and of our humanity as a whole. So hopefully you learned a little bit about code churn, about code debt, and all of the impact that AI is having on coding. And hopefully we can have these discussions more meaningfully and more in depth with your teams and with each other. But honestly, that's all I got for today. Thank you for watching. Subscribe.